Let's get right into it. I want to kind of finish up today's portion, and then next week we'll get into Darwinian evolution, the Bible, maybe some logic in the Bible, some observational findings that we see in Scripture, and then the following week we will get into biblical, reliable, authenticity and origins. So we're going to learn how the Bible was originated, how it was canonized, and how we can rely on the Old Testament and New Testament. That'll take a couple of weeks. So let's open up in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you again today, Lord, asking for your guidance, for your wisdom, and your support as we continue this teaching series into your word. Help us engage in meaningful discussions, allow us to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of community through the compassionate defense of our faith, Lord. And we pray this in your most precious name. Amen.
Mm.
Right. So before we launch into the slides, I kind of want to remind people or people that you go out and discuss religion and science and how the two are mutually inclusive, not exclusive, is that remember that when the Christian religion becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, which didn't happen with Constantine. Constantine made Christianity a legal religion, one of the many religions, along with pagan religion. It wasn't until 380 AD that Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. And what happens then is we see a lot more tolerance, obviously, for the Christian faith. And that's when we see the Christian population start to explode and literally come out of the woodwork. Um, a lot of the oppression, a lot of the criminality of Christianity falls to the wayside, and it really starts to take off. And we see a culmination of that with Charlemagne about 400 years later when he becomes the Holy Roman Emperor. But remember this, in that infancy, it was Christians who cared for plague victims. Now, plagues are running rampant through Europe and through the Roman Empire. And we see Christianity starting to develop hospitals, starting to develop hospice. That's why when you see a lot of hospice organizations now, they're usually Christian based. If it weren't for the first Christians, there would have been a lot more death, a lot more um, um, agony. So the first hospitals that we see come into existence, especially in Western Europe, were church-based, were Christian-based. During that process, that's how science comes in. Not only was there hospice or care, palliative care or comfort care, then we start to see the first medical science starting to evolve out of the compassionate care that Christians are showing to plague victims mostly. And there's this question of not just, oh, they're dying because they're evil or they're dying because they did something bad. Now there's a question of there's something going on here that's organically based, and there's something going on here that we can study and find the effects of. And then we start to get the scientific method in its infancy come out to say what's causing this ailment, what's causing this disease. Um, God made man for a purpose, for glory. Let's start to try to protect. Let's start to really save the human body. And you start to get that sense of there's something more here that we need to try to strive to perfect, to make better. And that's the involvement that we see with Christianity starting to get science kicked off. And it all comes from compassionate care and a sense of finality in mankind for a purpose. Kind of just a thumbnail sketch of how science and religion really kind of meshed together back then and are mutually inclusive. And thank God, literally, for theology and religion, which really kicked off science. So when you hear about the Dark Ages really weren't dark. The Christian church, monasteries, universities, Christian universities keep mankind, keep progress going towards a perfection, towards the image of God. And that's when we see the flourishing of arts and the flourishing of medicine, the flourishing of science, all by Christian-based people, scientists, medicine, arts. I mean, Michelangelo created this incredible art for the glory of God. Okay, so let's fast forward now. And just real quick, we'll get more into this next week. So Darwin's God, I want everyone to really understand that when we throw Darwin's theory around, that the reason that Darwin wrote the book that we all know so well on the origin of the species was ironically a way to kind of protect God from the evil he saw through nature. And how do we know that? Well, I think I read some excerpts the other week on his touching upon theology and God in the actual on the origin. And then we get into his letters. There's two right there in April and May of 1860. This is about a year or so after On the Origin was published. These are letters to Asa Gray, which is his very good friend at Harvard. Dr. Gray was agnostic. Dr. Gray was a botanist, a physicist, a Renaissance man. And he's going back and forth with Dr. Gray and debating on how can God create nature the way we see it. Competition, evil, species dying off, other type of animals eating other type of animals. And Darwin had this problem of there had to be some other mechanism causing this, not God. What I want you to take away is that religion is driving science, even in Darwinian theory. And unfortunately, from 1860 on, the Civil War didn't help kind of the whole theology of how can God allow this incredible carnage to happen. The Civil War, estimates are about 600,000 people died on both sides of the Civil War. World War I didn't help when you had millions and millions and millions of people die. Then you start to get this division of how can God allow this to happen? There must be some other mechanism causing this. And that's how you get Darwinian theory to take off. We're going to really drill down into more of this next week. And I'm going to read some of these letters that Darwin is writing to Asa Gray and others. Remember, Darwin was a Christian. He was actually a theologian. He went to seminary. What really happened to Darwin to get him kind of maybe shaking his fist at God, his young daughter died. His young daughter died, and that really hit him hard. But nonetheless, we'll get more to that next week. This is very interesting. You can see the screen right here. We're not going to get into it too much, but the Journal of Human Evolution, which is a very, very secular publication, in 2018, they published this article that was starting to run amok through popular science in the United States and in Western Europe. And it was a pretty profound discovery that was found with the Human Genome Project. I actually had my youngest daughter work on that project in British Columbia. She became a geneticist and ended up going to veterinary school. But I'm kind of proud that she actually kind of started this project, didn't even know what the outcome would be. But here's what the article, and here were the findings. There was a common mother and a common father. What they did is they took barcodes. Now we can actually get a barcode for each human being, each animal within each species. And each animal has a unique barcode. We all see them in the grocery stores. So after this study came out, the findings were there was a common father and mother for each species: Homo sapiens, canine, feline, go into Dachshunds, Great Danes. There was a common father and mother. Now, here's where the controversy goes. These studies protracted it back about 100 to 200,000 years. Now, I can tell you right now, there's further studies going on right now that we're getting closer to about 30 to 40,000 years. The point is that we are finding a common father, a common mother, i.e., an Adam and Eve for Homo sapiens. This was the finding for 9 out of 10 animal species. In other words, we could find common mothers and fathers for 9 out of 10 animal species, just like us human beings. This was taken from 5 million different barcodes and 100,000 species. Now, the two the two the two opinions you see down there lines up with the Bible. Well, theologians and other scientists have taken these studies to argue that this really does show or line up with a recent profound creation event. Now, some scientists say this proves that there was a main extinction event that restarted creation, but that's not the point. The point is that we're now starting to see genetically of a singularity of a creative event that created these species. And one thing we also found by this study is that species, or what the Bible or Genesis calls kinds, are quantized. Fancy term for divided, not from a common ancestor. Common ancestor is a trigger word for Darwinian theory. I could tell you right now, the whole common descent, common ancestor argument has been thrown out the window by present day evolutionary biologists. And we'll get more into that next week. So Galileo, everyone knows Galileo. No, he did not develop the telescope or invent the telescope. He perfected the telescope, and he used the telescope to pretty much prove what Copernicus, both highly Christian scientists who were looking for the fingerprint of God or looking for evidence of God through the cosmos, which David was doing in Psalm 8. We'll see that in a couple of minutes. Galileo gets a bad rap. He lived from 1564 to 1642. 1564 is about 50 years after the Protestant Reformation. There's this schism, or there's this belief that the Protestants pretty much take science and religion and run with it. But the Christian church actually was also doing their own scientific studies. The Christian church really led the forefront on astronomy, cosmology, study of the universe. So the schism or the fight that you see with Galileo and the church was not about science versus religion. It's one of the myths that we're taught. Oh, well, look, during the 16th century, right, and the 17th century, there's this huge fight between science and the church. And they used Galileo as the poster child to say the church persecuted Galileo, the church tortured Galileo, the church arrested Galileo. That's partially true. The reason for the trials of Galileo, which were show trials, and really he wasn't arrested and tortured per se. He was actually under house arrest in probably one of the most beautiful penthouses in the Vatican. The true fight, discourse, battle between Galileo and the church was the type of mechanism that the earth revolved around the sun or the sun revolved around the earth. Nothing to do with religion versus science. It was science versus science within the Catholic Church. At the time, the Catholic Church believed in what was called the Tychonian system. Tychos was an astronomer who had a hybrid system of heliocentric, helio meaning sun, and geocentric, geo meaning earth. of that the sun went around the earth, but the planets went around the earth and the sun. Galileo said, no, 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 no. The earth goes around the sun, and he proved it with the moons that he found with Saturn and Jupiter, and also his observations he made with Venus. Too much to get into. The real fight within Christianity was the proper way of how the planets moved around each other, not whether or not science and religion disagreed. You would not have that debate now. Now there's this schism, there's this division. You wouldn't even have a Christian scientist arguing. They'd be completely booted out of the room. I don't even want to hear from you. But remember, during this time, we have Copernicus before Galileo. We have Kepler, Johannes Kepler. We have Newton. We have Leibniz. I mean, these are the giants, the absolute giants of science, that because of their equations and their findings, we still study and we still do our scientific discoveries based on their formulas, based on their discoveries. You look down there on the bottom, E equals mc squared, F equals ma, the speed of light, force and matter, and how gravity works. ACGT, those are the proteins. Those represent the proteins of the DNA molecule, which is a computer program of how each and every one of us is made. And the point is, and Galileo said it perfectly, is that God wants us to go out and discover and see his glory and see his creation and understand his creation. And some theologians have said it's so easy, anyone can understand those letters right there and how they work. You don't have to be an incredible theologian or scientist. And it's open for everyone. And Galileo was the first one to kind of teach us that God's majesty is to be discovered. So just the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the works of his hands. Even from Old Testament times, we see this glory of God's work and this yearning to go out and learn and see the evidence of his creation. And we see that in Psalm chapter 8. I'm going to skip through some of these for brevity's sake. Copernicus said this perfectly. This is 500 years ago. The mechanism of the universe wrought for us by a supremely good and orderly creator, the system that the best and most orderly artist of all framed for our sake. Now, there's this misconception or myth that Copernicus was not arrested or not tried, but he was harassed because of his belief in this. No, he was harassed and he was debated because at the time, remember I told you about the Tychonian system? The debate was how the universe was ordered, how the planets moved around each other. And there was this still belief through observation, going back to the Greeks, to the Babylonians, that the sun went around the earth, not the earth around the sun. That's not a debate between religion and science. That's a debate between two scientific systems within the Christian framework, within the Christian worldview. Science is being driven and it's being operated through a Christian lens. And Darwin shatters that lens. So it's really important to understand before Darwin, after Darwin. But I'm here to kind of show you that in the last 10, 20 years, and we'll see this in a couple of minutes, hopefully, there's been kind of a pendulum swing a little bit back to this universe is more complicated than we thought. There is a beginning to the universe. Einstein finally agreed to that. Hubble proved that. Christianity, the Catholic Church, pretty much started Scientifically, that finding back in 1912, 1913, and now it's common knowledge within the scientific community that the universe did have a beginning. There was a singularity point to creation. The debate comes whether or not there is a creator God that did it or something else. Well, again, folks, to have a creation event happens, an uncaused, uncreated creator must create something out of nothing. And the only thing that can do that is omnipotent, all powerful, all knowing God. And that just happens to be the definition, attributes of our Christian God. So what I want to do is, okay, we'll get through this. We all know Romans 1:20. Romans 1:20, we have no excuse at all. We can see the internal power. We can see the divine nature in the universe. God's invisible qualities come through what we discover in a universe. And in the last 100 years, it's been an incredible discovery that we're seeing in the cosmos. Not just in archaeology that we went through a couple of weeks ago, but we're talking now further out into the realms of the universe. David mentioned it, as I keep saying, in the Psalms, and we'll visit that in a couple of minutes. There's no excuse not to know God. Romans 1:20, general revelation. We went through this. So science or religion is like this. So science is like this landing craft on D-Day, right? You're just concerned about how that landing craft is made, the structure of it, the steel, the balsa wood. These soldiers, are they fit enough to hit those beaches? How they're made, their muscles, their training. They're there to hit the beach and kill Nazis. Okay. Well, what's the ultimate purpose of that activity? And now I'm getting into Aristotle's philosophy. Aristotle had four causes. He had the efficient cause, the material cause, and then we come to what's called the effective cause and a final cause. This is like the efficient cause, the material cause. What's that landing craft made of? Can it survive? Are these men trained enough? The final cause is for them to have ultimate victory in evil versus good. Religion, theology, is like this view. There's a B-24 flying over that same beach. Now, the B-24 is sitting up there, and yeah, you're concerned about, can it fly? Does it have enough lift? Do those ships have enough armament? Can they go and they protect the people? But the final cause, the ultimate purpose of the D-Day landing was to conquer evil and make a better world. That's religion. So the pilot's sitting up there saying to himself, we're going to win. There's so much force here. There's so much material and men. We have this made. We are going to ultimately conquer, and D-Day is going to be a cakewalk. Now, it wasn't a cakewalk, but in the grand scheme of things, it was because of the overwhelming sense, firepower that we had. But more importantly, religion comes into this. There's a final cause. There's hope. It's not just about whether or not we have enough steel for these ships or enough men. It's why do we have that? And unfortunately, science gets ground into how is it made? What's it made of? Is it going to function? But theology takes that function, takes that design and say it's done for a purpose. Man is made for a purpose. Man is made in the image of God. There's hope for man. There's glory for man. And when you take that sense, then science helps explain how our bodies are built, how our bodies function. But theology gives us a soul and says we're built for a purpose. Now, we know that as Christians, and we know that life is precious. But when you get into a scientific mindset and take religion out of it, again, you're like those guys in that landing craft, and you're just concerned about survival. And folks, that's how abortion becomes tolerable or accepted in a non-Christian or scientific worldview. A fetus is just there to take in air. A fetus is just there to become a human being, right? But the ultimate goal, the ultimate final cause of that fetus, science doesn't care about. We care about it. That's why every life is precious. And to me, that's the basic division that we see. And that's why you see a lot of secular governmental systems allowing euthanasia, allowing abortion. It's because there's no self-worth, there's no final cause that we see in human beings. We're just animals. We're just animals that just happen to have cars and cities. And that's why you're starting to see attributes to animals saying, oh, well, they're precious and they're like human beings. No, they're not like human beings. They're not like human beings. They're not made in the image of God. Okay, we'll skip through this. It's a funny little. So real quick, the Apollo program, I think we all heard stories. Buzz Aldrin, I love Buzz. He's still alive, by the way. Met him years ago. Honorary guy, super smart, MIT, PhD engineer. Not sure if you guys know that on the Apollo 11 mission, he is on a lunar module on the moon. Guess what he does? He breaks out his Eucharist kit and he does a prayer on the moon, and he takes the Holy Eucharist, has a little chalice, well, it was a cup, not a chalice, takes his wine and takes the bread and has a ceremony. He was actually chastised by that. NASA really came down on him. You may know the Apollo 8 program years before this. That's when Jim Lovell read from Genesis 1 and 2. And NASA got sued by some atheist group, and NASA would not allow the astronauts to do any type of religious functions after that. Well, Dave Scott, astronaut, commander of Apollo 15, the moon buggy, the infamous moon buggy we all know, that little circle. Anyone care to guess what Dave Scott left on the dashboard of the dune buggy? A Bible. He snuck a Bible in, left it on a dune buggy. He actually almost got fired from NASA because of that. Yes, true. But so now we have a Bible on the face of the moon. That's Dave Scott just after he left the Bible on the moon. I'm sure he's grinning ear to ear, the glory of God. Picture of the Earth taken, I think Barry can help me with this. Charles Duke, Apollo 16, I believe. Charles Duke took this photograph. Of course, it's called a famous blue marble. And Duke, being a Christian, but not a practicing Christian in the sense of like he is now. Charles Duke, by the way, is evangelical. He goes around the United States, the world, talking about his experiences and how he became born again. I had the pleasure of meeting him through Barry. Barry is good friends with Charles Duke. Could tell you more one day. But Charles Duke, knowing his Bible, went back and looked at Job and read this. Job 26, verse 7. God stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. And General, I think he's a general now, General Duke said, oh my gosh, I saw that. We think Job was written about, maybe about 1400, 1440 BC. So Charles Duke said that hit him like earth-shattering, pun intended. So that brings us to, skip through that. T.S. Eliot, I love this quote. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. T.S. Eliot wasn't your poster child for Christianity or a theologian or a good evangelical Christian, but nonetheless, I think what T.S. Eliot is hitting on here is exactly what we experience. And through science and cosmology, and what we're learning now is that the more we go out and try to seek where we came from and explore, the more we come back and know the place that God made for us for the first time. So in a way, T.S. Eliot, I think, not intentionally trying to give this message, but certainly you can use that and say, aha, that's exactly what goes on with science. And the more that we know about our universe and our world that was crafted perfectly to sustain us knowing God. So Voyager, 1977, I think some of you guys may recall when this was launched. By the way, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are still chugging away. They're still blowing and going. I think Voyager 1 now is actually, or did leave our universe, I'm sorry, our galaxy 2 years ago, 3 years ago. At the time I did this slide, this is about 2, 3 years ago, I did this presentation. It traveled 3.7 billion miles, billion with a B. And what's interesting about this is Voyager, I don't know when that fire came up, but anyway, Voyager took, oh, wait. Voyager took this photograph. Come on. There we go. There you go. Can anyone, do you guys see that there's actually an arrow right there pointing to a little speck? No, it's not a piece of dust on your computer screen. Anyone care to guess what that little speck is?
Yeah, okay.
That's Earth. That's Earth. Voyager, I took what? I don't know. I don't quote me on this. I let people go on Wikipedia. Sometime it took for the command for Voyager to turn around and take this picture of our galaxy and try to get Earth. It just so happened at that precise moment, and it was a gamble. It was a crapshoot because the only way you could see Earth from Voyager's vantage point was if it was in a shaft of light. And sure enough, we can see that it looks like a reddish shaft of light. And sure enough, it's reflecting Earth so Voyager could pick it up. Well, folks, that's what we look like. Insignificant, right? A lot of people say this is insignificant. Look, this is a speck. We are nothing. How can we survive? I mean, there's got to be other stuff out there. I mean, look, we just comprise a small dust bunny in the whole universe. What makes us so special? And that's exactly what Carl Sagan, and I think you guys may recall Carl Sagan. He had a show called Cosmos on PBS, and Carl Sagan was on a Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and he was the science guru of the day. Of course, Carl Sagan was a raging atheist. Carl Sagan, there is no final cause to all this. Remember, we went to the efficient causes and material causes. Carl Sagan would not give you a final cause. Carl Sagan would not discuss religion. Religion has nothing to do with science. Well, I think someone should have schooled Carl Sagan on his brethren from several centuries before who were devout Christians, and in the search for God, found most of the discoveries that Carl Sagan bases his opinions on. So Carl Sagan said this, a fraction of a dot. Now he's talking about that little speck we saw of Earth. A fraction of a dot, our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet's a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity and all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Oh my gosh, talk about the high priest of negativity, the high priest of atheism. Unfortunately, a lot of people look at our earth and even mankind like this. But I want you guys to go to Psalm 8. We don't have time to really unpack that. Please read Psalm 8 in the lens that we see here. And we see it as lowly shepherd David, who just happens to become king. But we see King David reminisce on this same, he couldn't see that perspective, but he's looking at the cosmos. David is looking at the sun and the moon and the stars, and David comes out with a much different analysis. And I think we all know is that, how insignificant is man that God cares about us? And that's a rhetorical question because that's the whole point is that we are made in the image of God, and God has created us and created our earth in this incredible cosmic dark to exist in his kingdom, and he protects us from that cosmic chaos, which we're starting to figure out is not truly chaos. It's orderly made perfectly for our final purpose to be with our Lord God in the new heavens and the new earth. That's just me with oh my gosh, the guy I wrote Case for Christ, Lee Strobel. All right, I really want to try to get through this before we finish in about 15 minutes. Great book. It's called Cold Case Christianity. It's on Amazon. Is the astronomy in the book of Job scientifically consistent? So J. Warner Wallace, he is a professor at Talbot School of Theology, where I went. Professor Wallace is a relatively new professor, and he came out with this book a couple of years ago. He's not a physicist, he's not an astronomer, but he's making an observation based on astronomy and based on new discoveries we've made just in the last 20 to 25 years. So what he did was he took Job chapter 38, verses 31 to 33 real quick. You recall this is where God is having a debate with Job. Job is starting to doubt a little bit about, maybe my friends are right. Maybe I did do something bad that I'm getting punished for. I need to talk to God about this. And up to chapter, I think 33, 34, maybe, there's this debate between Job and God. And then God starts off in, I think, chapter 36 or 35, laying it on Job, saying, and I'm using the kids vernacular here when I go to university. He said, dude, Job, I made you, but I'm the one who made creation. I'm the one who made the earth. I'm the one who made the cosmos. I'm the one who made the stars. I'm the one who made the ostrich look so silly that you think what it's doing is dumb. And he goes through this analysis of different animals he made, different planets he made, different constellations he's made. The point is, God is trying to tell Job, I am the ultimate creator God. You need to trust me. I have a plan. Everything is carefully created out for a purpose. And I think what God is trying to tell us is that you guys, my creation, you have an intellect and you have a curiosity to go out and see my wondrous creations, and you're going to see evidence of it, and you're going to see how it's carefully crafted by an incredible, powerful creator. So Job 38, canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades? Pleiades are a constellation that we can see in the sky. I'll show you that in 2 slides or so. Or loose the bands of Orion. Orion's another constellation. Orion's belt, we all know. Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season? Another constellation. Or canst thou guide Arcticus with his sons? Knowest thou ordinance laws of heaven? And what God is saying, I'm doing all this to these constellations that you can see. But by the way, knowest thou ordinance laws of heaven? Well, at the time that this is written, book of Job, the laws of heavens weren't really known until we get into Newton, we get into Kepler, get into Copernicus, Galileo. But at this time, God is saying, hey, listen, one day you're going to see what I'm telling you is happening that you can't see now. Now, I get called on the carpet a lot on this because the Babylonians, before the book of Job, did know how planets moved, how stars moved. They did know some astronomy, but the Babylonians could never, ever, with their technology, not even up until maybe 100 years ago, could discover or understand what God is telling us in these verses. And here comes the kicker, or here comes the incredible discovery that proves what God was telling Job is not just nonsense, but actually how constellations move. So this is the Kepler telescope, came online a couple years ago. James Webb telescope came out just 2 years ago. It's now found 5,000 exoplanets. An exoplanet is an Earth-like planet. Well, you have secular, non-Christian scientists. They're chomping at the bit to try to find a planet like ours that can sustain advanced life. Because in their philosophy, it's going to say, aha, got you. We are not special. There are other creations out there. Mankind is just, again, nothing created. David wasn't talking about anything special. There's other stuff. There are other Davids out there in the world. So, we're not specially created. So far, zilch, nada. We have not found any planets, Earth-like planets at all that could even sustain liquid water, much less sustain life as we know it, advanced life. So real quick, canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades? What God is saying is that, Job, I'm the one who's binding those 7 stars of the Pleiades you see at night. Well, what does that really mean? Bind it. God is like keeping them together. What we found through the U.S. Naval Observatory Telescope, which is, I think, in Flagstaff. I think it's in Flagstaff, or maybe, Flagstaff. I'm sorry, it is. What we found was the Pleiades is an open star cluster that are all bound in the same gravitational field. There are 200. It's actually 250 stars moving in the same motion. Discovery is based on 25,000 individual measurements. Okay, Scott, what does that all mean? What it all means is that we had no way of knowing that there were 250 stars all being kept in a same gravitational field, moving in the same motion. The way you observe it is just the opposite, like they're not all together and they're not all moving the way God said he keeps them. We actually proved that the Pleiades are definitely moving in a synchronized dance that we see now, that we can only know, or we can only prove or check with modern technology we have now. So God is telling
Scott,
Job,
I must.
Yeah, go ahead.
Scott, I missed this in 7th grade math. I have no idea what the Pleiades is. Can you back up and just real quickly?
There you go. From our perspective, on Earth, the Pleiades will not change in appearance, but the formation is marching through the cosmos bound in unison. So on a night sky, this time of year, the Pleiades are going to be, it's summertime. Pleiades are probably going to be about 20 to 25 degrees
It's just a constellation, is what you're saying?
I'm
It's
sorry?
a constellation like Orion or whatever that.
Yeah, it's a constellation. Yeah, like Orion's belt, Big Dipper, Small Dipper. So the Pleiades this time of year might be a little hard to see. Further south, like where Belize and where Dave and Annette are, they seem a little higher up in the sky because we're closer to the equator. So it's easier to see down there. But the Pleiades, and I tell my high school and college kids, the way for you to remember this lecture is next time you see a Subaru, that symbol the Subaru has, that's the Pleiades.
Oh, wow.
That's the Pleiades. But the point here, people, is that God is telling Job something that would have been completely like, what is God talking about? And we know exactly what God meant, and only the creator of that could have known the way it's moving in a formation we would not have thought or discovered or even calculated until we saw how it is moving through modern telescopes. or loose. So God is saying, hey, Job, not only can I do that or did that, but Job, I can loose the bands of Orion. What does that mean? Well, Orion's belt contains two stars and one star cluster. Now here's the kicker. So it contains two stars and one star cluster. Back in antiquity, there is no way they could have known it was one star cluster. It looked like a bunch of stars. I mean, I'm sorry, one star that are not gravitationally bound, and in time they will not form a belt. Okay, Scott, what does that mean? What that means is that upon observations into the skies, Orion's belt will look like it hasn't changed. It's those three stars that we see in the night sky. But what God is telling Job is that I have the special knowledge because I created it. And in time, I will loose, go back to scripture, God will loose the bands of Orion. Well, now we know through now the Hubble telescope, James Webb telescope not only confirmed it, but pretty much now sees the actual calculations that those three stars, as we see it with our naked eye in the night sky, will gravitationally unbind and actually move away from each other. That is counterintuitive to laws of gravitation as we know it. So they will loose and the belt will kind of fall apart and the bands will be loosened. And God tells us that, what, 3,400 years ago? 3,400 years ago. It's like, that's nonsense. That can't happen. Well, it is happening. And we're proving it now with science. And then lastly, God says, finally, Job, canst thou guide Arcticus with his sons? Okay. Arcticus was an ancient name for a constellation that we see in the sky. Arcticus is the lead star or the end star of the famous, everyone recognize that constellation? That is the Little Dipper. Next time you see the Little Dipper, this time of year, I think the Little Dipper is pretty high in the sky. In any event, just Google how to find Little Dipper and it'll tell you how to look at it in your part of the world. Arcticus is that star that's on the very, very end of a handle, protractor handle, the Little Dipper. Babylonians knew about it. Babylonians kind of tracked how it was moving. But what God is saying is that, can't I guide the Arcticus with his sons? In other words, you can't do it. You're not going to know how it's done. Just trust me. Well, fast forward a couple thousand years. Again, our science, our technology finds that God wasn't lying. God wasn't making this up, because guess what we find? So Arcticus appears or appeared as a single star in antiquity, the time of Job. But in 1997, we discovered that Arcticus is actually a cluster of 52 stars. So that little white dot you see on the screen there, that's Arcticus, is really comprised of 52 stars around the Arcticus sun. Just like our solar system, there is and it's a G2 sun, by the way, meaning like a yellow star, i.e. our sun. Arcticus is a G2 yellow sun with planets or orbiting bodies around it, 52 in number. And guess what it's doing? It's running away at 257 miles per second. So Arcticus, okay, canst thou guide Arcticus with his sons? Arcticus is the sun. I mean, the sun, S-U-N, and the sons, S-O-N-S, are those 52 stars around that sun running away altogether. So when God tells Job, canst thou guide, can't I guide Arcticus with his sons? Well, again, it's something that kind of blew astronomers' minds was, wow, there really is Arcticus with the planets running around it all moving away at 257 miles per second, all in unison and all together. Now,
Scott, I'm a little dumber than everybody else. I got lost in the weeds here. We've got this constellation Pleiades. You've talked about Little Dipper, Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, and now this guy. And I just Googled it because I couldn't think of it. I know that Pluto is now no longer classified as a planet.
right.
It's just a bunch of cosmic dust in a dense cosmic dust laying out there. Can you just give me a little bit of high level? What I'm a little. Arcticus was thought to be a star, and it's 52 stars. Can you bring the non-scientist to
So so
a
so
bit?
what so real quick, what's going on is that in antiquity, and the Babylonians were expert astronomers. Greeks come on almost like 1,000 years later. But in any event, the Babylonians were making these observations of these constellations, and the Babylonians were putting mathematical formulas, and the Babylonians were experts on predicting how constellations or stars would move. So Arcticus, for example, real quick, Arcticus in Babylonian times, up until maybe the advent of Galileo and his telescope, Arcticus would have been just that one bright star that would have been known as just one orbital entity, right? What God is telling Job about 3,400 years ago, right, is that God can take that speck that you guys are seeing and thinking it's just one big star, but I could take it and I could guide it with its suns. Okay, well, back then it would have been nothing. But now we do know that, again, Arcticus with his suns, and when you read it in the Greek, I mean, in the Hebrew, it's a little bit more explanatory because Hebrews are really, anyway, I digress. The point is that God is saying, no, 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 wait. Arcticus is not just that one little star you're seeing right there. It's one star, one sun with other bodies around it, all moving in unison, right? Well, we proved that whoever wrote Job back then, was probably Moses, had to be inspired by a creator who knew this. That makes sense? You know, Moses couldn't have made it. Even the Babylonians couldn't have just made this up. Even if the Bible were fake, even if the Bible were just written by myths, soothsayers, or legend makers, there's no way on earth that anyone back then could have predicted or described the way we see these constellations moving the way God said that they would move. That makes sense? That's just three examples that we pull from the book of Job. I hope that kind of explains it. We're up against the bottom of the hour coming up. I really don't want to take up too much more time, but we'll conclude next week with The Privileged Planet. It's an incredible book. It's written by a NASA scientist. Oh, by the way, Dr. Gonzalez was fired by the National Science Foundation because of the publication of this book. There's also a CD. There's a YouTube. It's a 45-minute long YouTube presentation. It's going to steal my thunder, but I highly recommend it. Just Google Privileged Planet. It's incredible, and it's going to teach you guys, and I'll augment it next week, teach you guys that what David in Psalm 8 is seeing in the sky, and David comes back with this man is specially created, and the ultimate man that's created in the image of God, literally, is Jesus Christ, who becomes the second Adam. Okay. Now I'm kind of digressing a little bit, and we'll kind of unpack that next week. But The Privileged Planet, Dr. Gonzalez, Dr. Jay Richards. Dr. Jay Richards is a Princeton Theological Seminary professor who was also fired from Princeton because of the theological conclusions that this project, this book, this video makes. Dr. Richards now has the Discovery Institute, and I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Richards. Here's the irony real quick. Anyone know the origin of Princeton University? Why Princeton was created? What Princeton really was when it was
Seminary.
created?
It's a seminary.
Seminary.
It was a
All of them were
theological
seminaries.
seminary.
Harvard
was a
Seminary. John
theological
Harvard's
seminary.
rolling around in his grave. How do you win a lawsuit again when the foundation of these institutions are not being adhered to, but they come back 60, 80, 120 years later and just sue somebody and fire somebody for being a theologian that believes the truth? I don't understand how a lawyer can't defend that.
Well, I mean, I guess Collins and I could sit here all day with that, but it's the irony is, I mean, Oxford and Cambridge, theological seminaries, Oxford and Cambridge going back to 1100 AD. If it wasn't for theological seminaries like Cambridge and Oxford and the University of Bologna in Italy and many others at that time frame, science would have been lost. So religion, theology helped progress science. I hope you guys are starting to see that. And unfortunately, in the last 50 years, well, really from Darwin, 140 years, 160 years, it's been thrown on its head. But I'm telling you, there's a pendulum swing coming back. Okay, I don't want to keep you guys too much longer. I have 9:30, but your homework's going to be pull up the Privileged Planet, and we'll discuss the Privileged Planet next week. And if you looked at it, ask me questions. It's some fascinating little tidbits you can throw out to any atheist or agnostic or someone who believes that we're not specially created and meant. Remember the final cause. The final cause of human beings are to be holy and to be in union with our Creator, God, right? It's not about how we're made. We got cool hearts, we got livers that all work perfectly. Those are all efficient causes. Those are all material causes. But there's a reason why it's made that way. And there's a reason why the cosmos is made in the way that it's made that we're starting to see. And it's got the fingerprints of God all over. Okay. With that said, thank you guys.